So in that folder on my Google Drive, 4 sample reels that you could look at. Let's take a look at them. So we're going to look at the best example.
It's not over yet.
So in terms of the reel we just saw, so the things that make a reel work, right?
Yes.
Would be one, the type of content, and as you can see in that reel, there's a variety of content. Quality of the content, so typically you choose the best shots, right, from the different projects that you've worked on. Sound design is a critical element of every reel. When you're a beginner and you're now starting out, sometimes you may cut a reel to one piece of music. You may occasionally have bits of dialogue highlighted in there. But as you can see in this reel, yes, there is music, but the music changes in terms of what the style of the music is, the pacing of the music, and of course, it's an alignment with the shots and the editing style. So that's all sound design. And then, of course, the clips are also color graded, so they aren't just raw clips edited together. This person's style is very apparent. They are phenomenally well put together match cuts. This section right here. So he basically just told a story in 5 shots, right?
Yeah.
And the ball from one shot to the next is what we call an intellectual match cut, meaning it doesn't match graphically perfectly, but because we are following the trajectory of the ball in one shot and then it appears again in the second shot, we continue the connection in our minds, right? So
Yeah.
we know the ball is going to hit something, so he shows us a shot of it hitting something. So a reel is a way for you to show, how do I tell a story? And you can tell a story, especially if you want to do any kind of commercial work, in minimal shots and shots that are really just seconds, right? So the basic transitions, of course, a cut, then there's a dissolve or a fade. There are J cuts and L cuts and match cuts, and those really form the bulk of the transitions that we see. And finally, the last thing that I would point out in terms of this reel is he's very careful at manipulating the audience visually. So he's using transitions intentionally. So I could see that in the person's work, right? So the worst example of a reel is always good to know what a reel should not be. So that one right there, and the reason why that is not a successful reel, first, the choice of content. Now, that could be the best material that this editor has, but he didn't do a good enough job of presenting it. Then, of course, he stays a little bit too long on each individual project that he worked on. So there's not a lot of variety. And even though he's telling us what programs he used, he's not using them in a particularly creative way. And of course, the color grading throughout is inconsistent. Some of the footage is very grainy. And so question in my mind would be, what exactly is this editor trying to sell me on? Is it, if I want, it could be that I want someone who does cheesy 90s or early 2000s style graphics, because that's kind of what he has on the screen. There's a place for that, right? But generally speaking, that's not what you want to send out into the world. Someone could ask you for something specific in that vein, and then you could create it, right? So that's an example of a reel that's not too impressive. The person may have actual skills and experience, but the reel doesn't really present it in the best way.
One thing that I was trying to kind of struggle with is finding a balance that shows like a diversity in what I'm capable of doing, but still not getting so convoluted with all different kinds of stuff. So like I want to be able to like this is all I can do, but I don't want to overwhelm someone with something either. I want
Right.
to still be able like I still have a very specific style and
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right. So, and in that case, what you would do is you would create a shorter reel. So the average reel is going to be anywhere from 1 minute to 2 minutes, no longer than that. Any longer than that, people just stop looking at it. The best answer to your question, it would be you would create a 1 minute reel and you would use the absolute best material that you have and you would try to showcase specific skills. So what would those skills be? Of course, so now we would have to assess, well, so what, not what you think your best skills are, simply what skills do you possess as an editor? So the first could be, you could say, well, fundamentally, I'm a narrative editor as opposed to a TV or a commercial editor. And what does that mean? A narrative editor is someone who finds beats within a story and tells a story, much like that mini sequence we saw in the tennis match. That's a story. So you might be trying to tell a story with images, material from one project, and you would probably do that for about 5 to 7 seconds, and then you'd move on to another project, and you would show that you're telling a story with few clips as well, because efficiency is really what needs to be your defining characteristic of the reel. You want to show people that I can take a little bit of material and I can turn it into something, because editors are often tasked with, working magic and creating something out of nothing. So you have to think about your reel from that perspective. Whatever material I have to think about what is the best way for me to take a little of that material and present myself, not the material. The material isn't really important. It's you, the editor, and how you are presenting the material that makes the material relevant to the audience, meaning the person that's looking at your reel, right? So, okay, so let's take a look at the one you did. Okay, so you have some good material here, but you need to organize it differently. So the first thing would be you split the different types of content. So sport should be it should be together. And the problem with the sport material is it's inevitably in long shot, and you have to find a way to make the audience, meaning the person looking at the reel, go into the game. So if the material can't support you inserting the viewer into the footage, you can't use it. So you have to go through all of the footage and figure out, is it going to support my reel? Now, I don't know because I haven't seen the footage, but I have to go back to the raw footage and see, can I create a mini sequence using boys and girls matches and start outside in the bleachers and then go onto the court and enter inside of the game. So that's one thing. And then you have to keep it together. So that type of material needs to stay together. That's sport. The same would hold true for cinematography and editing. You have to separate everything out. And in this context, you probably would want one 1-minute reel for cinematography and one 1-minute reel for editing. Now, you have to separate. So even within editing and cinematography, you have to separate the material into, again, story units, into story blocks, into patterns. And I noticed something. So the thing you're doing is you're trying to use all of the shots you've selected. That's also a tell, right? You don't need to use all of the shot. The thing about being an editor is you are asked to find the best part of a shot and to use that in an edit. And that same philosophy has to be in your reel. And so if we look at the colors, and again, I'm ignoring whether it's editing or cinematography, you would do this. But if you look at the colors, you have to be careful not to allow two similar color palettes to butt up against one another in your reel, because you want that visual variety. It's all about colors and how the colors are going to work and keep the viewers engagement with the material, because they're going to say, oh, okay, it's not just what's within the frame, but it's how you are mixing colors as your reel develops. What people like to see in reels are not inanimate objects, right? We like to see people or animals or animated objects, not static objects. So don't give me a pillow. It's like it does nothing for me, right? A pillow can't act. So why am I seeing this shot, right?
Yeah.
And then you have this.
I'm kind of thinking, I know in some of my classes too, like shots, depending like eyes, like there's always a big focus surrounding like like humans' eyes, like because that's how we make connections with people. So it makes sense, like
Yes,
having that in a reel and having that as your focus, because you have a very short time to tell that story. You
exactly.
want to make that connection as often as
Right. And
possible.
so yes, and so you'd have heard about sight lines, eye lines,
Mhm.
and so yes, those are also a way for you to check to see how effective the snippet of the shot you're using is in terms of maintaining that engagement with the audience. Now, the one thing I do want you to be able to do is you should allow a couple of characters to speak in your reel, but you have to choose what they say. And as in any scene, you have to build up to that moment. So whatever visuals you curate for the reel, the editing reel specifically, whatever snippet soundbite, it could be 1 word, 2 words, 3 words, but keep it short, like a brief sentence. You would be choosing shots and material and editing it in a way that it sort of inevitably leads to that. So the reel itself is also something that you should script. Might seem a little weird, but you should script your reel, because the reel is 1 minute that you have to grab someone's attention. It's like a national commercial. They have 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 25 seconds, 30 to 35, 45 up to 60 seconds to grab our attention as a consumer and really get us into the acceptance zone that they want us to enter, where we either connect to or relate to or want the thing that they're selling. Apple is really good at doing that in their commercials. A couple of other brands are really good like that as well. But your reel also requires really tight scripting for it to be ultimately very successful. You have good material,
I
right?
appreciate it. I appreciate
Um,
it.
you just have to separate the material now, 1 minute for editing, 1 minute for cinematography. Both reels will require scripting, so be really intentional about the projects you curate for each reel, and don't forget to also edit the shots that you want to curate within the reel. So
Mhm.
that's where the scripting part comes in, and you really want juxtaposition. So remember the first reel, you want a tight shot, a really wide shot, a medium shot to maybe an over the shoulder, an out of focus shot to something that's really crisp and clear, but also the content makes sense. Like there's a connection between the content. Above that would be you color grading
Mhm.
throughout to give us a sense of your the way you see color and the world, the aesthetic values that you possess. So there's no way for me to tell you how to color grade. It's just basically you have to color grade based on your style, essentially. The
Okay.
one thing that you do have to do though is make sure that the colors pop as much as possible and the contrast is pretty decent, unless
Mhm.
there's a story reason. Then the hardest part I think for you would be the sound design, right? So if I go
And that
back,
was like the when you showed the first video, that was like the biggest thing that stood out to me was the sound
sound
design because
design,
that's not something I initially like considered, but I guess that is like it's a huge
it's
factor
half
when it
of the
comes to sound.
job. So if you don't sound design your reel, they will, of course, anyone is going to look at your reel and say, okay, this is still a student reel. And
Mhm.
it's okay for a student to submit a reel because sometimes they want interns or a trainee. But how much work is someone going to have to bring that trainee up to scratch is
Yes.
what the
Yeah.
question is going to be. So if you pay no attention to sound design, then they're like, ah, that's maybe too much work because here we have this other person who at least tried with sound design. So, which is why I left that part for last. The sound design is something you're going to have to shape for each reel. Like the editing reel should have its own sound design, and
Mhm.
the cinematography should have its own sound design. Cutting on the beat it's a fine technique. It's pretty much expected in some parts of the reel. So cutting on the beat, also cutting on action. You're going to have that in there at some point. Match cuts, J and L cuts should also be used. So here now we get more into technique. And so the straight cut, the J cut and the L cut. And now how are you going to use a J cut and L cut in the reel? Well, it depends on how you create your sound design. So the way you create your sound design is you look at the material that you're creating for the reel and you use the sounds associated with those shots, with those clips that you're using in the reel. So that's an opportunity that you have in here. Plus, what other sound design would make this environment come alive? Don't don't let the music tell the story. You are the editor. You have to tell the story. So, like I said, it's very common for students to just use music and cut to that, but it tells me you're a student, right?
Okay.
Let's try to move you away from that. So, what
Okay.
else could be happening? A dog could be barking outside. Cars could be driving past. Footsteps could be going. I don't know, but make the shot come alive. That's what editors do, right? So that's an example. You have a natural talent for it. Okay, I could
Thank
see
you.
that. One, avid, learning on your
Mhm.
own. Two, the DIT training, and three, the assistant editor training. Once you have those three under your belt and we update your resume and you start looking for internships or jobs, you are going to be able to find a way to join a local 700, which is the Editors Guild,
Okay.
wherever you are. So that is like a must because you didn't achieve it during undergrad, but those would be the
Mhm.
first steps. Beyond that, so I would say I would break it down like this. LA is where you want to go if you want to get an internship that could lead to sort of assistant. Okay, so there are two types of assistants. There's an editing assistant, which is an intern. Then there's an assistant editor, which you need to complete that training I mentioned in order to be even considered for it. And then eventually hope to become a full-time editor. And so LA would be generally the place you'd have to go to try to get onto a crew that's doing certain types of editing. There's also Washington, D.C., or really Virginia, Northern Virginia. There's a company that I interned with there, and they do a lot of work for TLC, Nat Geo, and Discovery, even though those three companies have internal editors as well. I have a friend who works at Nat Geo as an editor. But so there's also Northern Virginia, and I don't know if that company's name of the company is Maslow Media. Might have something else at the end of that name. They often have internships annually. So if you could apply and maybe you got the opportunity, that would be a good place to start off, because a lot of people that work there eventually move up into other places in the entertainment industry. Then there's New York, which isn't too far away from Pennsylvania, and also New Jersey. And in New York and New Jersey, you're going to find a lot of what we call boutiques, small operations. Sometimes it's really just a matter of finding the opportunity that they may offer at the right time. But if you do have the AVID and the training under your belt, there's another route. Because if you complete the DIT training, then what you would want to do is you would actually want to register not with the local 700, you want to register with the local 600, which is the Cinematographers Guild. And so since a DIT is on set, sort of a hybrid between someone doing data management and someone doing on-set editing, dailies, etc. You sort of get the best of both worlds. It is an incredibly difficult environment to flourish under, but it is one of those opportunities where there aren't many qualified people, and there's always a need for DIT. So that's also another reason why I wanted to do that training, and why it would be also another route for you to go into. And the thing about joining the guilds is once you join and you get the hours in, which might take 2 or 3 years, honestly, eventually you become the go-to person in that area for that guild that you're registered with. So that is how you would start on your career as an editor.
Awesome. I appreciate it. This has been awesome. Like, thank you so much for all of for meeting with me, and yeah, seriously.
Sure, no problem.